So I'm going to get us started. My name is Aileen McDonough, and I am the Director of Content here at EverC, and I am very proud to have with us today David Luna. He is a former U.S. diplomat and national security official. He has worked in the transnational threats on transnational threats for over 25 years. Currently, he is director at the International Coalition Against Illicit Economies, and also co-director of the Anti-Illicit Trade Institute at the Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center at George Mason University. He also chairs numerous committees and working groups at numerous international organizations, business associations, and NGOs. So we are very excited to have him with us today to talk about the crime convergence that we are currently battling, how to leverage and analyze the intelligence that we're seeing, and trying to bring the threat networks to light, which enables us to disrupt them and hopefully get rid of them. So take it away, David. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aileen, and thank you to Melissa and EverC for the invitation to certainly provide some insights the way that ICAIE tends to look at the crime convergence security issues through the prism of illicit trade, illicit economies, terrorism, and other interconnected security threats. Just building from some of the commentary for the last session, I enjoyed listening to Frank and Mary and learned some good things about avatars and zombie accounts. My presentations will be more at the policy strategic level in the more complex, in the more dangerous world in which I agree with them. There's more sinister bad actors in the global illegal economy, and frankly getting worse. When we start looking at crime convergence and all these greedy bad actors, it is about money, frankly, and for some of the state-sponsored criminality, it is about power and really trying to malign influence and active measures destabilize, I think, global peace and security towards their benefit. Next. So connecting the dot becomes very important, and one of the ways, certainly I remember doing this when I was with the U.S. government, but now in building public-private partnerships to counter illicit economies. Looking at the patterns of life, at not only illicit routes, illicit activities, illicit financial flows, the terrain, supply chains across the digital world, e-commerce platforms, online marketplaces, the dark net. A lot of these risks and threats are interconnected, and I think as professionals and communities work on countering, undoing the disruption, undoing the dismantling of various bad actors and threat networks, I think these intelligence overlay become critical. And by that, it's important to look, again, whether it's human trafficking, drug trafficking, wildlife trafficking, money laundering, threat finance. If you begin to superimpose these illicit, economies within, time and space, you can begin to do the mapping to be able to fuse that interconnected intelligence that becomes very important. Next. So at ICAIE, we work on developing, again, these public-private partnerships, next slide, to do more. It's about the collective action, leveraging data lakes, working with, members, communities across sectors to be able to leverage intelligence, to leverage data again, to pinpoint different threats, again, different actors, different networks, and then work with governments to do the harder work, which is the investigations, the prosecutions, the disruption, and the dismantling of networks. Next. So these are the core areas that ICAIE works on. Again, we look very closely at doing evidence-based research, looking at the convergence of various security threats across illicit spaces. We make corruption a high priority because it is my opinion that corruption helps to fuel a lot of transnational crime, a lot of the security threats that we see today in really all parts of the world. And again, we work as well with the high tech, with different industries across sectors to surface bad actors based on the leveraging of that data intelligence. Next. So I mentioned earlier, the global illegal economy is truly getting worse. I mean, any one illicit market is incredibly profitable for the cartels, for corrupt authoritarian regimes, and even terrorist groups. And some areas have become even more profitable, in which some of these bad actors networks gravitate to, especially when it comes to the pillaging of natural resources. It's not only mining. I mean, it's critical minerals. It's wildlife. It's illegally harvested trees. It's a lot of things, right? So if you look at some of these illicit markets collectively, I guess it varies from one year to another, but it's about $4 to $7 trillion a year. That's right, $1 trillion. So if the global economy were to compare it to the top 5 economies in the world, including the US, China, Japan, Germany, it probably would be in that top 5 just based on the massive illicit wealth that is generated every year. Next. So it's not only the money, obviously impacts of illicit trade are not only financial, there's environmental health impacts, the whole issue of child labor, child sex trafficking is becoming not only more profitable, but more challenging from a humanity perspective. And of course, when they converge, again, they do lead to more chaos, to more violence, to more insecurity. Next. And of course, from a geopolitical perspective, the impacts of these illicit economies, for example, towards democracy and governance are great. And we're seeing it in Ukraine, we're seeing it today in Gaza, and we're seeing it in other parts of the world. Next. So who are the leading bad actors creating all this insecurity based in greed and power? Well, I mean, it's criminals, cartels, gangs, but you got the kleptocrats, you got the cyber bandits, the professional enablers and facilitators are becoming they have been from the beginning, but it is good that the international community is beginning to focus on some of these enablers and facilitators. And again, once you have some of the bigger authoritarian states profiting from illicit trade, they do lead to even graver security threats for democracies and others who are committed to a rules-based world order. Next. So surfacing bad actors and threat networks becomes very important. Again, we try to do these visuals to condense a lot of complex issues into into slides and infographics that people can understand better. on what we're dealing with, the gravity of the global illegal economy next. And then again, this is true for authoritarian states, and how they leverage again various illicit markets. Next slide. Towards really attaining greater power, illicit wealth, world chaos, and it's the means to an end for governments like Russia, governments like Iran, governments like the communist Chinese Party. Next. So going back to the illicit dynamic, it is the fact that 90% of all goods move through maritime shipping. Next slide. And those lanes that were highlighted are important to visualize the interconnections. So these are some of the more risky ports of free trade zones that contribute to that scale, to that trillions of dollars of illicit trafficking, again, whether it's drug, counterfeits, weapons, and other illicit goods and contraband. It's important, again, when you start to doing the overlays from point A to point B, which are the transit to the demand market, point C, and other points, oftentimes the illicit movement goes from many destinations. Next. So when you start, again, looking at the trade routes, the legal commerce, legal trade, legal banking, and you look at those trade routes and compare them to some of the illicit trafficking trade routes and activities, for example, as it relates to narcotics, you begin to see some very interesting patterns. Next. You overlay that with corruption, right? And again, this is a perception index by Transparency International. But again, if you're looking at different terrains and looking at different illicit markets, begin to overlay, you do begin to see some zones, some hubs of illicit trade of concern. Next. So this is a nexus between corruption and counterfeiting, again, going from the ports, going from legal trade, going to some of the provenance markets that contribute, towards global counterfeiting. Again, you begin to see the interconnections between some of the ports and some of the counterfeiting that goes on every day around the world. Next. So from a national security perspective, as you're seeing, these areas, these illicit spaces that have all these illicit activities, then you start looking at the threat finance and how these start to contribute to these arcs of instability, and to how they begin to fuel more dangerous national security threats, including not only the various militants across the Sahel, but as we see in Gaza, as we see in Colombia with the FARC, as we see in Afghanistan with the Taliban. Next. So what's of interest in this is obviously, the axis of resistance and, I think Iran's very complicity related to the financing of Hamas, to the financing of Hezbollah, to the financing of other Islamic groups. But in the periphery, again, when you start to do the overlays and looking at the illicit markets and seeing how jurisdictions, imputed jurisdictions, like the United Arab Emirates and Dubai, especially, whether it's the Jebel Ali free trade zone in Dubai, or whether it's money laundering through real estate, gold finance, illicit finance. And you also look, again, at the periphery of jurisdictions, you do begin to see, some of the ways that the terrorist groups began to finance itself. It's not only, Iran back, but it's investments in UAE, investments in Lebanon, investments in the Sudan. When you look at the illegal cigarette trade, when you look at cyber and recent, cryptocurrency and the use of social media and the fundraising through crowdsourcing, again, interconnections and the underground money laundering, money launderers are also laundering the proceeds of crimes for other bad actors and networks. Next. I mentioned this briefly on how UAE, Jebel Ali, the free trade zone. Next slide. Contributes to the funding of different terrorist organizations. I mean, yes, criminals. I mean, if you look at the tri-border, you have some of the illicit cigs, some of the black cocaine, helping to fund Hezbollah. But even out of the UAE, through illicit whites, you are funding, or it is funding, different militant groups across the Sahel. Many years ago, there was a famous case dealing with Marlboro Man, who was one of the financiers, drivers for Al Qaeda. And of course, we all are aware of some of the harms that the terrorist group did to the United States and to other partners around the world. Next. So ICAIE believes a lot in public-private partnerships. I've been really lucky to have the support of people like Dr. Louise Shalian at the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center, was really empowered professionals like myself and others to be innovative and look at issues like hubs of illicit trade, to do these evidence-based research projects that looks at the convergence of various illicit trades. And I've been talking about some of them, narcotics, weapons, human, and other illicit goods and contraband. I just talked about Dubai, talked about tri-border, but in Central America, you got the Colón Free Trade Zone and other actually free trade zones across Central America that are, again, becoming the havens for criminals, the havens for groups like the Wagner Group. And of course, we see some of the manifestations of some of these illicit vectors, not only within Ukraine, but how Putin and his corrupt government has been able to finance the unjust war in Ukraine through both criminality, but also through the evasion of sanctions through illicit finance, including, I must say, the oil for terror scheme that Iran has been doing and working with Russia. Next. So again, one of our objectives here is to inform policymakers on the interconnections of these harms and threats, not only by these hubs, but again, the interplay, the dynamics between various bad actors, the interconnections of various money laundering, financial havens as well in different parts of the world, some which I have mentioned, again, being Dubai, one of them, for not only for the Gulf of Middle East, but really globally. Oftentimes you see a lot of illicit goods and commodity, if not illicit finance, coming out of Dubai that is impacting markets all over the world, but especially in the Americas as well. And so, a big area of concern, and this is why it's important to do these evidence-based research. Next. And, again, I love to conceptualize various threats. I won't go into detail. The good thing is hopefully the host of today's event will share some of these presentations. But here, again, you do see the convergence, not only with the mapping regionally, but the mapping of illicit markets, the mapping of corruption and money laundering nodes, and their interplay, and how, again, they come together to create a more grave harm. Each any one of these illicit threats is a big concern, but when they are interlinked, it becomes a bigger threat altogether. Next. So with data, leveraging different baskets of indicators, whether it's the Global Organized Crime Index by Global Initiative, Transnational Organized Crime, of which I am a member, or some of these other reports, including from the State Department, including from Global Financial Integrity, from the World Bank, and others, you can begin to do a comparative study of different illicit markets to really work with some of these governments to really strengthen the will to do more disruption and work with law enforcement to do more of the dismantling of criminal networks in some of these areas. Next. So based on different data sets, we can look specifically at individual illicit markets to continue to do that comparative country to country, region to region, hub to hub, and other interconnected areas. Next. And again, this is where you can do more ranking to help set a baseline for those governments, those markets that are committed to work, whether it's NGOs like ICAIE or I also chair the OECD business side of the Working Party to Counter Illicit Trade at Business at OECD. Again, it's about leveraging communities, leveraging good partners who want to do more to help really mitigate the risk and harms associated with illicit trade, illicit economies, threat convergence. Next. And then this is another infographic comparing the levels of corruption in some of the 7 markets that we did for phase 1 of our track hubs of illicit trade research project. We will be entering into phase 2, looking at 4 or 5 other hubs of illicit trade. And again, this begins to provide a more global panorama on the scale and breadth of illicit trade. So in addition, next slide, to the work at ICAIE track, ICAIE does similar type of research. John Cassara, one of the leading experts in trade money laundering, works with us to educate communities on underground banking, including trade-based money laundering. Next slide. And we look at specific markets like the Americas to see, in this case, the emerging illicit actors in different parts of the Americas, but really also looking at Chinese triads and CCP-inspired criminality, especially important to the Americas. Next. I mentioned this earlier, a big area, especially vis-a-vis critical minerals. It's not only the cartels, you got the Wagner Group, you got China as a state really interested in these areas. Next. So with different profits from whether it's the drugs or human trafficking. Next slide. Cartels like Sinaloa and the cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación is beginning to expand into new profitable illicit sectors, illicit industries like counterfeit pharmaceuticals, which really they're growing these markets and scary numbers in Mexico and across Latin America. Next. Yeah, I mentioned again, it's not only the criminals, the expansion, the joint ventures, if you will, between transnational criminal groups, but also their interaction dynamics with the Russians, the Chinas, the Iranian backed criminal groups and militias, which is becoming a greater harm. Next. And I'll leave you with, 5 converging transnational threats that I think are imperiling international peace and security. And I've been talking a lot about how Putin and the oligarchs have financed the war in Ukraine. That will continue to be a concern. I mentioned China. The Belt Road Initiative has contributed to expanding illicit economies. And I encourage those who are interested to look at the Belt and Road Initiative map and do overlays with all of the other illicit markets that I have been talking about. And you will see it in clear terms how China has contributed to each and every one of those illicit markets. Concern about Iranian-backed criminality and how they support not only evade sanctions, but help to finance terrorist proxies. I think transnational criminal groups globally are becoming more powerful and more violent as well. And corruption fuels a lot of these transnational security threats. So with that, I know it's a lot. I mean, we do this over a year, 2 semesters at Track, but I wanted to do this in 25 minutes to do a power presentation here on threat convergence. Question?
Don't think we have any questions. I think probably everyone is sitting the way I am, just absolutely astounded at what's going on. Even though I am in the industry, it is a lot. But really, that's exactly why we're all fighting it, and that we're all gonna, that's exactly why we're all gonna collaborate and fight it together from the payments ecosystem, all the way through. So, David, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today and bringing our attention and our awareness to this very serious issue. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. We really appreciate you being here.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Aileen, and look forward to continuing to monitor your good events at EverC.
Well, I think we should have you back for another one. I think we probably only scratched the surface today.
All right, great. Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much.